Julianne splashed the steaming coffee across Brielle's uniform. Housekeepers should remember where they belong. Uneasy laughter rippled through the grand ballroom as wealthy guests pretended not to notice the burn spreading across Brielle Dawson's chest. She neither flinched nor argued. She simply lowered her eyes, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her pain. Julianne stepped forward, raising her hand to shove her again. Another hand caught her wrist. A calm voice broke the silence. "Who gave you permission to touch someone under my roof?" Silence settled over the ballroom so completely that even the clink of crystal glasses ceased. Julianne Ashcroft stared at the hand gripping her wrist. For the first time that afternoon, confidence abandoned her. "Nikolai." Her voice lost the effortless superiority she wore like expensive perfume. Nikolai Ashcroft released her wrist with deliberate calm. He neither raised his voice nor displayed anger. Instead, he removed his tailored charcoal overcoat, stepped toward Brielle, and gently draped it over her shoulders. The expensive wool concealed the coffee stains spreading across her uniform, while shielding the reddened skin beneath. "You should have someone examine that burn," he said quietly. Brielle lowered her gaze. "I'm all right, sir. The luncheon is behind schedule. I can change and return in a few minutes." Several guests exchanged uneasy glances. She wasn't asking for justice. She was worried about the event. Nikolai studied her for a long moment before turning toward the room. His expression remained unreadable. "I have one question." No one moved. "Who saw what happened?" The silence grew heavier. Influential business leaders, charity board members, luxury brand executives. People accustomed to speaking with confidence suddenly found the polished marble floor fascinating. Julianne forced a brittle laugh. "It was just an accident. The housekeeper stepped in to— I wasn't asking you." His interruption was calm, almost gentle, yet it carried enough authority to make Julianne's words disappear. An elderly philanthropist slowly cleared his throat. "I saw Miss Dawson standing still." Another guest nodded. "The coffee was thrown intentionally." A third voice followed. "She never raised her voice." Then another. "And Miss Ashcroft attempted to push her." One by one, witnesses spoke, not because they had suddenly become brave, because lying to Nikolai Ashcroft seemed far more dangerous than admitting the truth. Trevor Miles, the estate operations manager, felt cold sweat gathering beneath his collar. He had watched everything. He had done nothing. Nikolai looked directly at him. "You were responsible for supervising today's staff." "Yes, sir." "Did you witness the incident?" Trevor hesitated. Julianne shot him a desperate glance. Years of protecting her reckless behavior battled against a single look from the man standing before him. "Yes." "What happened?" Trevor swallowed hard. Miss Dawson wasn't responsible for the serving error. His voice sounded smaller with every sentence. Miss Ashcroft blamed her anyway. "And?" "The coffee." He closed his eyes briefly. "Was thrown deliberately." The ballroom became impossibly quiet. Julianne's face drained of color. "You coward!" she hissed. Trevor didn't answer. Nikolai simply nodded once. No triumph, no outrage, only confirmation. He turned toward Brielle again. "Did you defend yourself?" She hesitated. "There wasn't much point." "You could have." "I could have." Her smile was faint. "But the guests deserved a peaceful luncheon more than I deserved the last word." That answer lingered in the room long after she finished speaking. Even those who had laughed moments earlier felt their cheeks grow warm with shame. Nikolai noticed the blister beginning to form near her wrist. His eyes darkened, almost imperceptibly. "Edith." The head housekeeper stepped forward immediately. "Yes, Mr. Ashcroft. Take Miss Dawson to the medical suite." "Of course." Brielle instinctively shook her head. "There are still desserts to prepare." Edith looked as though she might cry. "My dear." Before she could continue, Nikolai spoke. "The luncheon can wait." His tone remained even. "Your health cannot." For the first time, Brielle looked directly into his eyes. There was no pity in them, no uncomfortable sympathy, only quiet respect. She gave a small nod. "Thank you." As Edith carefully guided her toward the hallway, the ballroom remained frozen. No music, no conversation, only hundreds of unspoken thoughts. Nikolai faced the guests once more. "I apologize that today's charity luncheon has been interrupted." He paused. Integrity, however, is never an interruption. No one applauded. No one dared. Because everyone understood that what had begun as a public humiliation had just become something far greater. The true owner had returned. And everyone in Ashcroft Manor suddenly remembered whose roof they were standing beneath. The medical suite overlooked the eastern gardens of Ashcroft Manor, a quiet corner of the estate rarely visited by guests. Edith Lawson gently dabbed cool ointment across the red mark on Brielle's wrist, while the younger woman apologized for something that wasn't her fault. "I'm sorry you had to leave the luncheon because of me," Brielle said softly. Edith stopped applying the bandage and looked at her in disbelief. "My dear, you were the one who was burned." "I know." "And you're apologizing?" Brielle offered a sheepish smile. "I suppose it's a habit." Edith sighed. "One day you'll learn that kindness doesn't require carrying everyone else's mistakes." Before Brielle could answer, a knock sounded at the door. Nikolai entered alone. No assistants, no security, no audience. His gaze briefly settled on the bandage before shifting to Edith. "How serious?" "A minor burn," Edith replied. "It will heal." He nodded once. "I'm relieved." The room fell quiet. Brielle instinctively stood. "You don't have to stand for me," Nikolai said. "I'm still your employee. You are receiving medical care. I can do both." For the first time that day, the corner of Nikolai's mouth moved almost imperceptibly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "I've reviewed today's staffing reports," he said. "They don't explain why a temporary housekeeper has logged nearly 40 extra hours this month." Brielle looked uncomfortable. "It wasn't important. It became important the moment I noticed." She glanced toward Edith, who quietly looked away. Realizing there would be no escape, Brielle answered honestly. "The evening team has been short-staffed." "So you volunteered. They were already exhausted. And no one instructed you?" "No." Nikolai studied her for a moment. "Why?" The question seemed to surprise her. As strange as it sounds, because the work still needed to be done. He remained silent, almost as if waiting for a different explanation. There wasn't one. Later that afternoon, Nikolai decided to walk through the service corridors instead of returning directly to his office. It had been years since he had inspected the manor from the employee's perspective. What he found surprised him. In the laundry room, Brielle was laughing with two elderly attendants while folding towels with remarkable speed. One of the women accidentally dropped an entire stack onto the floor. "Oh dear." Before the woman could bend down, Brielle dramatically placed a hand over her heart. "The towels have chosen freedom." The elderly attendants burst into laughter. "So rebellious," Brielle continued with complete seriousness. "We'll have to negotiate." Even the usually stern laundry supervisor chuckled. Nikolai watched unnoticed from the doorway. There was no performance, no attempt to impress anyone, just effortless warmth. A few minutes later, another employee rushed into the corridor carrying an overloaded tray. He tripped. Several polished silver serving spoons scattered across the marble floor. "I'm so sorry." Brielle immediately knelt to help collect them. "There." She handed him the final spoon. Crisis successfully downgraded from disaster to mild inconvenience. The young footman laughed nervously. "I thought Mr. Miles would fire me." "Then let's not give him the opportunity." As the footman hurried away, Brielle returned to work as though nothing unusual had happened. Nikolai finally stepped forward. She looked genuinely startled. "Oh, I've interrupted your negotiations with the towels." Color rose to her cheeks. "You heard that?" "I did. I was trying to improve morale. It appears successful." She laughed softly. "It costs nothing." They walked together through the corridor. Neither seemed in a hurry. "You realize," Nikolai said, "that most people would spend today talking about being humiliated." "I imagine they would." "You haven't mentioned it once." She considered the question before answering. "The burn hurts." "I know. The embarrassment will fade. And the insult?" She shrugged gently. "I can't decide what another person says about me." He looked at her. "But I can decide whether I believe it." The simplicity of the statement lingered between them. They reached the entrance to the main kitchen. Inside, chefs hurried from station to station, preparing desserts delayed by the earlier incident. Without hesitation, Brielle tied on a fresh apron. "I should get back. You've been excused for the day. The pastries haven't." Despite everything that had happened, despite the public humiliation, despite the pain hidden beneath the fresh bandage, she was still thinking about whether the charity guests would receive dessert on time. Nikolai watched her disappear into the busy kitchen. For years, he had built businesses worth billions by learning how to judge people within minutes. Confidence, greed, ambition, fear. Those qualities were familiar, but this woman confused every instinct he possessed. She had been publicly humiliated, yet she carried no bitterness. She had every reason to demand fairness. Yet she worried only about unfinished work. Standing alone in the quiet corridor, Nikolai found himself asking a question no business report could answer. How had someone treated with so little respect managed to lose none of her own? For the next several days, Brielle returned to work as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She arrived before sunrise. She left after everyone else. The burn on her wrist slowly faded beneath a neat bandage, but she never mentioned it unless someone asked. If a co-worker needed help carrying supplies, she was already there. If an elderly employee struggled with heavy linens, Brielle quietly took half the load without making anyone feel incapable. Ashcroft Manor resumed its familiar rhythm. Only one thing had changed. Nikolai had begun paying attention, not in the obvious way that sparked gossip. He never singled her out in front of others. He never interrupted her work unnecessarily. Instead, he observed. He watched how employees instinctively relaxed when Brielle entered a room, how arguments ended faster because she somehow made everyone laugh before resentment could grow, how the newest staff members always seemed less frightened after working beside her for only a few hours. Leadership recognized leadership, even when hidden beneath a simple housekeeping uniform. Late one afternoon, Nikolai found Edith organizing inventory records inside the housekeeping office. He closed the door quietly. "I'd like to ask you something." Edith removed her glasses. "Of course. Miss Dawson." She smiled knowingly. "I wondered how long it would take." "You know her well?" "As well as she'll allow anyone." Nikolai leaned against the desk. "She doesn't behave like someone who has always cleaned rooms." Edith laughed softly. No. She behaves like someone who once managed the people cleaning them. His eyes narrowed slightly. You know. I know. Edith remained silent for a moment, almost as though asking herself whether Brielle's story belonged to anyone else. Finally, she spoke. 5 years ago, I attended an international hospitality conference. Nikolai listened without interrupting. There was a young operations manager receiving an award for transforming one of the country's most respected luxury hotels. She smiled at the memory. Elegant, confident. Every department trusted her. Guest satisfaction reached record levels. The hotel became famous not because of its chandeliers, but because every employee felt valued. Nikolai frowned slightly. That manager was Brielle. Edith nodded. She supervised hundreds of employees. Housekeeping, front office, banquets, guest relations. She could solve a staffing crisis before most executives even realized one existed. Silence settled between them. So why is she here? Edith's expression softened. Her mother. Nikolai immediately understood there was more. The cancer treatments lasted nearly 3 years. Insurance covered very little. Brielle sold almost everything. Her apartment, her savings, her investments. Eventually, she resigned from the hotel because caring for her mother became a full-time responsibility. When her mother passed away, Edith looked toward the window. There was nothing left. No home, no savings, no professional network, only debt. Nikolai remained completely still, and she never mentioned any of this. Never. She refuses pity. Edith folded another towel with practiced hands. I once asked why she didn't tell anyone about her management experience. What did she say? If people respect me only because of my old title. Edith smiled sadly. Then they never respected me at all. The sentence lingered in the room. Nikolai had spent years surrounded by people who introduced themselves with achievements before their names. Brielle had done the opposite. She had buried every accomplishment beneath quiet work. That evening, Nikolai remained in his office long after sunset. Instead of reviewing international contracts, he opened Brielle's employment file. Temporary contract, housekeeper, excellent attendance, no complaints, minimal references, nothing about luxury hotels, nothing about executive leadership, nothing about the awards Edith had described. She had deliberately erased herself, not because she was ashamed, because she wanted every opportunity she received to be earned again. The following morning, Nikolai crossed the central courtyard earlier than usual. Rain had fallen overnight, leaving the stone pathways slick with water. Ahead of him, Brielle noticed one of the elderly gardeners struggling to lift several heavy flower containers before guests arrived. Without hesitation, she rolled up her sleeves. "I'll take this side." "Oh, Miss Dawson, your wrist. It still works." Together they carried each planter into place. By the time they finished, Brielle's fresh uniform was streaked with damp soil. She looked down at the stains and laughed. "I lasted almost 12 minutes, the gardener chuckled. "That's a personal record. I should celebrate." Neither of them realized Nikolai had witnessed everything. He approached only after the final planter had been positioned. "You've made yourself dirty before your shift even begins." Brielle glanced at the mud and smiled with quiet embarrassment. "I suppose housekeeping should be familiar with cleaning uniforms too." "You could have called maintenance." "I could have." But he needed help now. Nikolai looked at the elderly gardener, whose grateful eyes said more than words ever could. Then he looked back at Brielle. For the first time in many years, admiration had begun growing into something deeper than professional respect. Not because she had once managed one of the finest hotels in the country, not because of her education, not even because of her resilience, but because, after losing nearly everything life had given her, she still instinctively chose to lighten someone else's burden before her own. Rumors traveled through Ashcroft Manor far faster than official announcements. Within a week, nearly everyone had noticed the subtle change. Not special treatment, not favoritism, simply respect. Whenever Nikolai crossed paths with Brielle, he acknowledged her with a quiet nod. He asked practical questions, listened to the answers, thanked her when she solved problems others overlooked. To most employees, it was nothing extraordinary. To Julianne Ashcroft, it was unbearable. She had spent years believing attention was something people owed her. Now she found herself competing with a woman wearing a housekeeping uniform. She refused to accept it. One afternoon, she invited several department supervisors for coffee in the Manor's private lounge. The conversation began innocently. By the second cup, the poison appeared. I suppose kindness can be very strategic. One supervisor frowned. What do you mean? Julianne stirred her tea lazily. Some women understand exactly how to gain powerful men's sympathy. Nobody answered. She smiled. I've seen it before. They pretend to be humble. They never argue. They become indispensable. And before long, they're impossible to remove. The implication settled over the table. Trevor Miles lowered his eyes. He knew precisely who she meant. No one challenged her. Silence, Julianne had learned, often worked better than persuasion. The rumors spread without anyone remembering who first repeated them. Perhaps Brielle stayed late because she wanted Nikolai to notice. Perhaps helping elderly employees was simply a performance. Perhaps her mysterious past wasn't admirable at all. Perhaps she had planned everything. Each version became slightly crueler than the last. Brielle noticed the change almost immediately. Conversation stopped when she entered staff rooms. Lunch invitations quietly disappeared. Several employees who once laughed with her now offered polite smiles before walking away. Only Edith remained exactly the same. One evening she found Brielle eating alone in the staff cafeteria. You know what's happening? Brielle nodded. I do. And you're saying nothing. What would I say? The truth. Brielle smiled gently. People who truly know me won't need convincing. And those who don't? They probably wouldn't believe me anyway. Edith shook her head. You make forgiveness look far too easy. It's not easy. Brielle looked down at her untouched tea. It's simply lighter than carrying anger. Across the estate, Nikolai began noticing changes of his own. Staff meetings had become unusually tense. Departments that once cooperated now blamed one another for minor mistakes. When Brielle entered shared spaces, conversations ended. Experienced employees suddenly requested transfers away from her work assignments. None of it made sense. Until one afternoon, he entered the kitchen unexpectedly. Two younger maids were whispering beside the pantry. They hadn't seen him. I heard she's trying to become the next Mrs. Ashcroft. Seriously? That's what everyone says. Nikolai stopped walking. The second maid looked uncertain. But I've never seen her act that way. You don't have to. They say women like her are patient. That's how they trap wealthy men. The room became silent. Both women slowly turned around. Their faces instantly turned pale. Nikolai regarded them calmly. Who says that? Neither answered. I asked a question. The first maid swallowed. People talk. People have names. Neither spoke. He nodded once. Return to work. They hurried away, trembling. Nikolai remained standing alone in the kitchen. He had spent years dismantling organizations built on fear and deception. Rumors interested him because they revealed the intentions of the people spreading them, not the people targeted by them. That evening he requested employee schedules, performance reports, internal complaints, everything connected to Brielle Dawson. There was nothing. Not one disciplinary warning. Not one complaint from a guest. Not one accusation supported by evidence. Only praise. Quiet. Consistent. Professional. Meanwhile, Brielle continued living exactly as she always had. The following morning, she found fresh flowers placed in the staff dining room. No one knew who had ordered them. Several employees admired them before returning to work. When one of the younger maids accidentally knocked over the vase, water spilled across the floor. The room froze. Before anyone reacted, Brielle grabbed a towel. "There," she laughed softly. At least the flowers enjoyed their swim. A few people smiled despite themselves. Others looked away, ashamed. Because even after being isolated, even after hearing whispers stop every time she entered a room, she still refused to become the bitter person the rumors described. Watching from the hallway, Edith quietly whispered to herself, "They're trying so hard to convince everyone she's pretending. Because they cannot understand that goodness this genuine actually exists." Rumors could spread through a mansion in hours. Truth, however, had a habit of arriving all at once. 3 days after the charity luncheon, Nikolai convened a private meeting inside the Manor's executive conference room. Present were Trevor Miles, Edith Lawson, the estate's legal advisor, the head of security, and Julianne Ashcroft. Julianne entered confidently. She assumed the meeting concerned the unfortunate misunderstanding. She even expected an apology. Instead, Nikolai sat silently at the head of the long table. A large monitor behind him remained black. No one spoke. Finally, he looked toward the security director. "Begin." The screen came to life. Security footage from the ballroom appeared. There was no dramatic music, no editing, only reality. The recording showed Brielle carrying a fresh pot of coffee toward the service station. A waiter accidentally brushed against another employee, causing a minor delay. Brielle calmly stepped aside to prevent the tray from falling. She never touched Julianne. She never argued. She never even raised her voice. Then came Julianne. She pointed toward Brielle. The audio was clear enough to capture every word. "You'll take responsibility," Brielle answered quietly. "I can't admit to something I didn't do." For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, Julianne deliberately lifted the cup. She threw the steaming coffee directly across Brielle's uniform. The conference room remained completely silent. The footage continued. It showed Brielle standing perfectly still while several guests looked away. Then Julianne reached forward again, her hand extended toward Brielle's shoulder. A frame later, Nikolai appeared. His hand caught Julianne's wrist. The video ended. No one moved. Julianne forced a laugh. Cameras don't always show context. Nikolai didn't answer. Instead, the legal advisor placed several mobile phones onto the table. "There are 7. Julianne frowned. "What are those?" "Guest recordings." The lawyer opened the first video, a different angle. Then another. A third. One guest had filmed the ballroom decorations. Another had been recording a speech for social media. A charity volunteer had accidentally captured the confrontation while testing a live stream. Every recording showed the same sequence. Every recording confirmed the same truth. There was no missing context, only repeated evidence. The security director quietly added, Several guests voluntarily submitted these recordings after hearing Mr. Ashcroft was reviewing the incident. Julianne's confidence finally cracked. "They're trying to embarrass me." "No," Nikolai replied calmly. "They're preserving facts." Trevor lowered his head. He realized there had never been any possibility of denying what happened. The evidence existed from every direction. Not because someone planned it, because the truth had simply been witnessed by too many people. Nikolai folded his hands. "I've spent years building this family's reputation." His voice remained soft. "The Ashcroft name opens doors because people believe our word has value." He looked directly at Julianne. "You attempted to replace truth with influence." She straightened in her chair. "I'm family." "I know. You can't seriously punish me over a housekeeper." The room became still. Nikolai's expression never changed. "I am not responding because she is a housekeeper." He paused. "I am responding because you forgot she is a person." Those words landed harder than any shouted accusation. Julianne searched every face around the table. No one defended her. Not Trevor, not the legal advisor, not even the employees who had once tolerated her behavior. They had all seen enough. Nikolai reached for a single folder. Inside were estate management documents. He signed one page, then another. Finally, he slid them across the polished table. "Effective immediately. You are relieved of every operational responsibility within Ashcroft Manor." Julianne stared at the papers. "You can't do this." "I already have. My company remains yours. My family position remains unchanged. My authority here." Nikolai met her eyes without anger. "You surrendered that yourself." Silence answered him. After several long moments, Julianne stood abruptly. "You've chosen a servant over your own blood." "No." He spoke only once more. "I chose character over entitlement." She left without another word. The heavy doors closed behind her. No one moved for several seconds. Then Nikolai looked toward Trevor. "You witnessed repeated mistreatment." "Yes, sir." "You remained silent." Trevor's voice barely rose above a whisper. "I was afraid." "I believe you." That answer surprised everyone. But fear explains silence. It does not excuse it. Trevor nodded slowly. "I understand. You will complete leadership ethics training before returning to supervisory duties." "Yes, sir." The meeting ended quietly. There was no celebration. Justice rarely sounded triumphant. Later that afternoon, word spread through the estate. Not through gossip, through official announcement. Julianne no longer directed household operations. The decision traveled beyond the manor as guests who had attended the luncheon privately shared the videos they had recorded. Business leaders praised Nikolai's response. Charity organizations expressed respect for his integrity. Employees who had avoided Brielle during the previous week began looking at her differently. Some offered hesitant apologies. Others simply smiled. Brielle accepted every apology with the same grace. She never asked who had believed the rumors. She never demanded explanations. Because she understood something many people never learned. When truth finally arrives, it rarely needs revenge to make itself heard. And throughout the city, one sentence from Nikolai Ashcroft quietly became the story everyone remembered. "Power without character is something I will never tolerate." Ashcroft Manor felt different after Julianne's removal. Not quieter, lighter. Employees who had once worked with constant anxiety slowly rediscovered something many of them had forgotten. They smiled. Housekeepers chatted while preparing guest rooms. Kitchen staff laughed without immediately looking over their shoulders. Even Trevor Miles seemed transformed. He no longer barked orders from a distance. Instead, he carried boxes alongside junior employees and thanked people at the end of each shift. Fear had disappeared. Respect was beginning to replace it. Through all of it, Brielle remained exactly the same. She still arrived before dawn. She still checked on the oldest employees first. She still insisted on carrying supplies herself whenever someone looked tired. The only difference was that people no longer looked away when she entered a room. One rainy afternoon, Edith knocked gently on the door of Brielle's small staff apartment. "You've received a meeting request." Brielle looked up from the hospitality management book she had borrowed from the Manor Library. "A meeting?" "Mr. Ashcroft's office." She blinked. "Did he say why?" Edith smiled knowingly. "He only said to come at 3. For the next 2 hours, Brielle convinced herself she had forgotten some important task. Perhaps she had made an accounting mistake. Perhaps a guest had complained. Perhaps her temporary contract was ending earlier than expected. By the time she knocked on Nikolai's office door, she had imagined every possibility except the real one. "Come in." His office overlooked the city skyline, elegant without being extravagant. Tall bookshelves lined one wall. Historical maps covered another. No unnecessary decorations. Everything reflected discipline. Nikolai stood beside the window. "Please have a seat." She sat carefully. "You wanted to see me, sir?" "I did." He placed a thin folder on the desk between them. "I've spent the last week reviewing the hospitality programs operated by the Ashcroft Foundation." She listened quietly. "We sponsor shelters, medical charities, community centers, senior care initiatives. But our guest services remain inconsistent." He opened the folder. "I need someone to build a hospitality division from the ground up." Brielle nodded politely. "That sounds like an important position." "It is." She smiled. "I hope you find the right person." "I believe I have." Silence. She looked at him uncertainly. "I'm offering the position to you." Her expression froze. "I." She glanced down at the folder. "Director of Hospitality, Ashcroft Foundation. Full executive appointment. Competitive salary. Professional benefits." Her fingers never touched the paper. "There must be some mistake." "There isn't. I'm a temporary housekeeper." "You are." "I've been cleaning guest rooms." "You have." "I don't understand." Nikolai folded his hands calmly. "I didn't hire the housekeeper." He held her gaze. "I hired the leader, hidden beneath the uniform." The room fell silent. Brielle slowly shook her head. "I can't accept charity." For the first time that afternoon, Nikolai smiled. Not politely, not formally. A genuine smile. "Neither can I." She looked confused. "That's why I'm offering you a job. Not sympathy." The words settled deeply inside her. He continued. "I verified your employment history. You transformed one of the country's finest luxury hotels. You trained managers who still lead successful properties today. You rebuilt guest satisfaction scores that experts believed were impossible." He paused. "None of those achievements disappeared simply because life became unfair." Brielle lowered her eyes. "I've been away from management for years." "So ride a bicycle." She looked up, puzzled. He allowed the faintest hint of amusement into his voice. "People never forget how." A quiet laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The tension eased. "I've also spoken with employees throughout the estate," Nikolai continued. "Do you know what they mentioned most? My overtime? No. My housekeeping? No. They all said the same thing. When people work beside you, they become better versions of themselves." Brielle stared at the folder again. No one had described her that way before. Not even when she managed an entire hotel. She whispered, "What if I fail?" Nikolai answered without hesitation, "You won't. You sound very certain." "I am." "Why?" "Because people who ask that question usually prepare enough to prevent it." Another long silence followed. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally, Brielle reached for the folder. Her hands trembled slightly. "I'd like to earn this." "You already have. I still want to prove myself. I expect nothing less." She signed the acceptance documents with slow, careful strokes. When she finished, Nikolai extended his hand across the desk. "Congratulations, Director Dawson." She looked at his hand for a brief moment before shaking it. "Thank you." Then she smiled warmly. "Mr. Ashcroft." Later that evening, the announcement spread through the foundation. Employees celebrated the appointment. Even those who had once believed the rumors congratulated her sincerely. Edith quietly wiped away tears. Trevor smiled with genuine relief. For the first time in years, Brielle walked through the halls not as someone rebuilding a broken life, but as someone finally allowed to become the person she had always been. Watching her greet every employee with the same humble warmth she had shown as a housekeeper, Nikolai realized something unexpected. He had offered her a leadership position because she deserved it. Yet somehow, she had already restored something far more valuable. His faith that true character still existed behind titles, uniforms, and appearances. The seasons changed almost unnoticed. Spring flowers disappeared beneath the warmth of summer. Summer yielded to crisp autumn mornings. Nearly a year had passed since Brielle Dawson accepted her new position at the Ashcroft Foundation. The transformation reached far beyond her title. She redesigned hospitality programs for senior care centers. She introduced staff training focused on dignity instead of efficiency alone. Volunteer retention increased. Guest satisfaction reached levels the foundation had never recorded before. Donors frequently commented that every event felt different, warmer, more personal. No one realized the difference came from thousands of tiny decisions. Remembering a volunteer's favorite tea, making sure wheelchairs always had unobstructed pathways, teaching reception staff that eye contact mattered as much as polished marble floors. Brielle believed hospitality was never about luxury. It was about making another person feel they belonged. Nikolai admired her from a respectful distance. They worked together often, board meetings, charity planning sessions, community visits, business dinners. Yet neither crossed the invisible line professionalism had quietly drawn between them. There were no dramatic confessions, no accidental embraces, no stolen kisses, only growing trust. One evening, after a successful fundraising gala, the foundation headquarters finally became quiet. Most employees had already gone home. Brielle remained in the conference room, reviewing volunteer feedback forms. Nikolai entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. "I thought you might still be working." She accepted one with a grateful smile. "You know me too well." "I'm beginning to." They stood beside the tall windows, overlooking the city lights. Neither hurried to leave. After several comfortable minutes of silence, Brielle spoke. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." She wrapped both hands around the warm cup. "I've wondered about it for months." He waited patiently. "Why did you believe me so quickly?" The question lingered between them. "You hardly knew me. There were witnesses. There weren't at first." "You still stopped Julianne immediately." She looked at him with quiet curiosity. "What made you so certain I wasn't lying?" Nikolai smiled faintly, not because the answer amused him, because it had always seemed obvious. Guilty people usually speak first. She frowned slightly. They explain. They justify. They interrupt. They search for excuses before anyone asks. He looked directly into her eyes. You didn't. You were too busy protecting everyone else. She remembered that afternoon, worrying about the delayed luncheon, apologizing to Edith, trying to return to work. Not once had she asked anyone to punish Julianne. Not once had she demanded sympathy. A soft laugh escaped her. I never realized that. I did. Silence settled again. Comfortable, natural, the kind shared only by people who no longer feared quiet. After a while, Brielle spoke again. You changed my life. He slowly shook his head. No. You earned a new one. I only opened the door. She looked down at her tea. When my mother died, her voice grew softer. I thought everything meaningful had ended. My career, my confidence, my future. I believed I had become someone people overlooked. Nikolai answered without hesitation. They overlooked you. He paused. They never diminished you. Her eyes lifted toward his. For a long moment, neither spoke. Words suddenly seemed too small. Outside, rain began falling against the windows, exactly as it had on the afternoon he offered her the position. The memory made them both smile. I should tell you something, Nikolai said quietly. She waited. I've negotiated billion-dollar mergers. I've met presidents. I've faced people whose names make entire industries nervous. A hint of humor warmed his expression. And somehow, he exhaled softly. Asking you this feels considerably more difficult. She laughed. I don't believe that. It's true. He looked at her with complete sincerity. I've spent most of my life respecting your character. Somewhere along the way, that respect became something much deeper. The room seemed impossibly still. I don't expect an answer tonight. I only wanted you to know honestly. Brielle felt tears gather unexpectedly, not from surprise, from peace. She had imagined love disappearing from her life years ago. Instead, it had arrived quietly, built upon trust rather than excitement, respect rather than appearances. She stepped one pace closer. I do have an answer. He remained silent. I've admired your strength. I've trusted your integrity. She smiled through shining eyes. And without realizing it, I began looking forward to every meeting that appeared on my calendar simply because your name was on it. A genuine smile spread across Nikolai's face, one rarely witnessed by anyone else. He gently offered his hand, not demanding, simply inviting. She placed hers in his. Neither rushed the moment, because both understood something neither wealth nor power could ever purchase. The strongest love was never built in a single dramatic moment. It was built slowly, one act of respect at a time. 1 year later, Ashcroft Manor hosted another charity luncheon. The ballroom looked much the same. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead. White roses decorated every table. Distinguished guests filled the room with quiet conversation. Yet something essential had changed. No one entered the manor afraid. The atmosphere reflected the culture Brielle had helped build throughout the foundation. Employees greeted one another by name. Managers thanked volunteers openly. Even senior executives carried their own plates when needed, instead of expecting someone else to rush forward. Respect had become part of the estate itself. Backstage, preparations moved smoothly until a sudden crash echoed through the service corridor. A young maid stood frozen beside a shattered serving tray. Crystal glasses lay scattered across the polished floor. Juice spread across her freshly pressed uniform. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. She fought back tears. "I'm so sorry." "I'll pay for everything." Several nearby guests turned toward the noise. The young woman's breathing became uneven. She clearly expected shouting, dismissal, humiliation. Instead, before anyone else could react, Brielle quietly knelt beside her. "It's all right." She picked up a clean towel and began wiping the floor. "Let's make sure nobody slips." The young maid stared in disbelief. "I ruined the luncheon." "No." Brielle smiled warmly. "You dropped a tray." "Those are very different things." A few nearby employees immediately joined them. Within moments, the broken glass had been cleared away. Fresh refreshments were already being prepared. The crisis disappeared almost as quickly as it had begun. The young maid whispered, "Why are you helping me?" Brielle looked up gently. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it most." Across the ballroom, Nikolai watched the scene unfold without interrupting. His expression softened with quiet pride. Nothing about Brielle's kindness had changed. Titles hadn't changed it. Recognition hadn't changed it. Love certainly hadn't changed it. She was still the same woman who believed dignity should always be protected. A distinguished guest approached Nikolai with a thoughtful smile. "I've been meaning to ask you something." Nikolai turned politely. "Go ahead." The guest glanced toward Brielle, who was now reassuring the embarrassed young maid with the same patience she offered everyone. "Why did you marry her?" Nikolai didn't answer immediately. He watched Brielle laugh softly after discovering that one unbroken glass had somehow rolled beneath a table. She held it up triumphantly, as though recovering hidden treasure. Several employees laughed with her. The frightened maid finally smiled. Only then did Nikolai respond. His voice remained calm, steady, certain. "Because kindness is the rarest luxury I've ever owned." The guest fell silent. Around the ballroom, more people had overheard the answer than either man realized. One by one, guests rose from their seats, then volunteers, then employees. The applause began quietly before filling the entire hall. Brielle looked around in surprise. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she realized the applause wasn't for an elegant speech or another successful charity event. It was for a life lived with grace. Nikolai walked to her side and gently took her hand. This time, she didn't stand beneath his roof as a temporary housekeeper. She stood beside him as his equal, not because wealth had changed her place in the world, but because her character had changed the world around her. And inside Ashcroft Manor, everyone finally understood the lesson that no title could ever teach. Power commands attention, kindness earns devotion, and respect is the only foundation strong enough for love to last forever.